The morning sun brushed gold across the hills of Bethlehem. Dew sparkled like tiny stars on the grass. A boy's laughter rang out as he chased a playful lamb through the mist. His name was David, the shepherd who sang to God when no one was watching. Could one shepherd boy really be chosen by God to lead a whole nation? David sat beneath an old olive tree, strumming his harp, his voice soft and full of joy. "The Lord is my shepherd," he whispered, far away, in another town. An old prophet named Samuel prayed beside a small flickering lamp. Suddenly, the still air seemed to whisper, "Go to Bethlehem. I have chosen one of Jesse's sons to be king." Samuel's eyes widened. "A new king," he whispered. The world seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere on those quiet hills, a shepherd boy played his harp, unaware that God's great plan was already beginning. The quiet hills stretched endlessly, filled with the sound of sheep and song. David's brothers often teased him, calling him the little dreamer, but David didn't mind. While others saw him as a boy, God saw something deeper. That same morning, Jesse's home bustled with work. His older sons were strong and busy, preparing the flocks for market. In the distance, a cloud of dust appeared. Samuel was on his way. The air seemed to hum with unseen purpose. "Father," one of the boys called, pointing toward the road. Jesse shaded his eyes. "That's the prophet of God," he whispered, amazed. No one knew why he was coming, but heaven did. As Samuel reached the town gate, the elders met him, their faces full of questions. "Do you come in peace?" one asked nervously. Samuel smiled gently. "In peace. I have come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord." Gathered Jesse and his sons, the elders hurried to obey. Jesse's heart pounded. What could the prophet want with his family? Inside the courtyard, David's brothers straightened their clothes, trying to look their best. None of them imagined that God's choice would be the one still out in the fields, singing to the sheep. The courtyard filled with quiet excitement. Samuel looked at Jesse's sons standing tall before him. Eliab stepped forward first, strong, confident, sure of himself. "Surely this is the one," Samuel thought. But God whispered to his heart, "Do not look at his appearance or his height. I do not see as people see. I look at the heart." Samuel's eyes softened. He shook his head gently. "Not this one." Jesse called his next son Abinadab, then Shammah. Still, the Lord said no. The line of proud faces ended, and the prophet waited. Something, or someone, was missing. Samuel lowered his staff and looked at Jesse. "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse hesitated. "There is still the youngest," he said. "He's tending the sheep." The prophet's face brightened. "Send for him. We will not sit until he comes." Runners dashed toward the hills. Far away, David heard his name carried on the wind. He looked up, heart racing. Something inside him stirred, like a whisper from heaven saying, "This is your moment." The sheep turned their heads as if they too were listening. The air in Jesse's courtyard grew still. Samuel waited, eyes fixed on the distant hills. The brothers whispered among themselves. "Why would the prophet ask for David?" Eliab muttered. "He's just a shepherd." Shammah crossed his arms. Maybe Samuel made a mistake, but Samuel knew better. His heart was steady, listening for God's quiet voice. Out beyond the town, David raced down the hillside, the sun at his back and his heart full of wonder. "Why do they want me?" he thought. Dust swirled around his feet as he ran faster, the sound of his sheep fading behind him. Something holy waited ahead, something that would change his life forever. The sound of footsteps grew louder until David appeared at the gate, breathless, cheeks flushed. He bowed politely, eyes full of curiosity. Samuel's heart stirred. The boy's hands were rough from work, yet his eyes held a peace that only came from walking with God. "Rise," Samuel said gently. "Come here." David stepped forward, unsure but calm. The brothers stared, puzzled. How could this be the one? Samuel's fingers tightened around his horn of oil. In that moment, the voice of God whispered once more, "This is the one. Anoint him." The courtyard fell silent. Only the whisper of wind through olive leaves could be heard. Samuel lifted the horn of oil high. A single drop gleamed in the sun. Slowly, he poured it over David's head. The oil ran down his curls, glistening like liquid light. The moment the oil touched him, David's heart filled with peace, like 1,000 songs rising inside him. Samuel smiled softly. "The Lord has chosen you," he said. David's eyes widened, unsure whether to bow or speak. His brothers stared, unable to believe what they saw. But heaven had already spoken. As the oil dripped to the ground, a soft breeze swept through the courtyard. David closed his eyes. In that instant, he felt God's presence deep within, stronger than fear, brighter than the sun. Samuel's old eyes filled with tears. "God sees not as man sees," he said quietly. "People look at the outside, but God looks at the heart." The words hung in the air, powerful and true. David didn't feel like a king. David didn't feel like a king. He felt small, humble, yet loved by the one who knew his heart. Samuel nodded once more, then turned to leave, his mission complete. As Samuel walked away from Bethlehem, his cloak fluttering in the breeze, he looked back once at the small figure among the sheep. He smiled. "The king God sees is already in the field," he whispered. Back on the hill, David lifted his harp again. The same hands that held the staff now played a song of praise. The same heart that watched over sheep would one day watch over a nation. "Lord," he sang softly, "I am yours." The melody rose through the valley like a promise, one that heaven had already written long ago. The sun dipped low as Samuel's journey ended, but David's was only beginning. Days passed, and life returned to the quiet rhythm of the fields. David tended his sheep as always, yet his heart felt different. Stronger, brighter, alive with God's promise. Each song he played sounded fuller, as if heaven itself joined in. Far away in the royal palace, King Saul sat in darkness. His heart was restless. The joy he once had was gone, and fear filled his mind. His servants whispered, "Perhaps music can help him find peace." One nodded. "There is a shepherd in Bethlehem who plays with his heart. We should bring him to the king." The next morning, a royal messenger arrived in Bethlehem. Jesse stepped forward, surprised to see a rider in royal blue robes. "King Saul has sent for your son," the messenger said. "He seeks the boy who plays the harp." Jesse blinked, unsure what to say. David looked up from the pasture, harp still in his hands. "Me?" he asked softly. His brothers exchanged glances. They still couldn't believe this shepherd was chosen by a king. "Go, my son," Jesse said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Play for the king, and play for the Lord." The journey to the palace took 2 days. David walked behind the royal horse, his harp tied carefully to his back. He had never seen such walls, tall and shining, banners of gold waving above. Soldiers stood guard at the gate, their armor gleaming. David's heart pounded. He prayed quietly, "Lord, help me bring peace." Inside, music from other players echoed faintly, but none carried the same warmth his songs did. The songs that spoke straight from his heart. Inside the palace, Saul sat with his head in his hands. "Bring the boy," he said quietly. The door creaked open, and David stepped in, clutching his harp. The room was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. David began to play. The music flowed like water, gentle, healing, full of life. Saul's trembling hands slowly relaxed. His eyes lifted toward the boy, peace returning to his heart. "Whose son are you?" he asked softly. "I am the son of Jesse," David replied. Saul smiled faintly. "Then you will stay with me." From that day on, David often played for the king. Whenever Saul's heart grew troubled, David's music brought peace. But in quiet moments, Saul would watch him and wonder, what was it about this boy that carried such power? David didn't know what the future held. He only knew he must serve with love. As he played, the Spirit of God was with him. The harp's notes rose like light into the air, filling the halls of the palace and the hearts of those who listened. Even the servants paused to whisper, "Surely this is no ordinary shepherd." The palace grew busier each day. David served faithfully, playing his harp, helping the guards, carrying messages. Yet even as he stood in the king's halls, his heart never left the hills. Every night he looked out toward Bethlehem, remembering the quiet fields and the God who chose him. One morning, a messenger burst through the gates shouting, "The Philistines have gathered for war!" Saul's face turned pale. Their champion, Goliath, is calling for a fight. David listened quietly as fear swept through the palace. A giant? A challenge? The boy who once faced lions and bears while guarding sheep felt something stir within him again. Courage that came from God alone. The sound of war drums echoed across the valleys. Saul led his army to the battlefield where Goliath roared each morning, daring anyone to face him. Back in Bethlehem, Jesse packed food for his sons fighting in Saul's army. "Take this to your brothers," he told David. "See how they are doing." David nodded, tying the basket to his donkey. He didn't know it yet, but this simple errand would lead him face to face with the giant. The same God who once called him from the fields was about to call him again, to courage, to faith, to victory. When David reached the camp, he saw thousands of soldiers lined up on one side of a deep valley. Across the ravine, the Philistine army shouted and waved their spears. And there, towering above them all, stood Goliath, massive, armored, laughing at Israel's fear. David's heart raced. "Who is that?" he asked a soldier. "That is Goliath," came the trembling reply. "No one dares face him." But David's eyes narrowed. "No one?" he whispered. The Spirit of God stirred again inside him. The same courage that once faced wild beasts now rose in his chest. David hurried to his brother's tent. "Why is everyone so afraid?" he asked. Eliab frowned. "Why are you here? You should be with the sheep." But David's heart burned with purpose. "God saved me from lions and bears," he said firmly. "He can save me from this giant too." His brothers shook their heads, but a soldier nearby overheard and ran to tell the king. Saul summoned David at once. When the boy entered, Saul stared in disbelief. "You are only a shepherd," he said gently. "This man has been a warrior since youth." David smiled softly. "The Lord who saved me before will save me again." Saul sighed and lifted his bronze helmet. "Then go," he said softly, "and may the Lord be with you." He tried to dress David in his own armor, but the pieces were too heavy. David smiled and shook his head. "I cannot fight in this. I'll go as I am." He picked up his staff, chose 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream, and placed them in his pouch. As he stepped out toward the valley, the sun caught the glint of his sling. He wasn't the strongest, tallest, or most trained, but he carried something far greater, a heart full of faith. The valley fell silent. Israel's army stood frozen as David stepped forward. His sling hung by his side, his pouch clinking softly with 5 smooth stones. Goliath, when he saw him, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" he thundered. His armor gleamed like fire under the sun. But David didn't move back. He looked up at the giant and said, "You come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty." A hush fell. Even the wind stopped to listen. Faith, small and shining, faced fear, tall and roaring. David reached into his pouch and pulled out a single stone. Smooth, small, ordinary, but in God's hands it was enough. He placed it in his sling and began to spin it, faster and faster, until the air itself seemed to sink. Goliath roared and raised his spear, stepping forward with heavy thuds that shook the ground. But David's eyes never wavered. "The battle is the Lord's!" he shouted, releasing the stone. The sling snapped, the stone flew, and time itself seemed to stop. The stone struck Goliath's forehead with a sound that echoed across the valley. The giant stumbled, his great body swaying like a falling tree, then crashed to the ground with a thunderous roar. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the Philistines gasped in fear and began to run. Israel's army shouted with joy, their voices shaking the hills. David stood still, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the giant, lying silent before him. God had done what no sword could do. The smallest shepherd had brought down the mightiest warrior. When the battle ended, King Saul called David to him. "Whose son are you, young man?" he asked softly. David bowed. "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." Saul studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "The Lord was with you today." The soldiers cheered around them, but David's heart stayed humble. He knew it wasn't his strength that won. It was God's. As trumpets sounded, David's song of victory rose quietly in his heart. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me." That night, the stars shone brighter than ever. David sat outside the camp, his harp in his lap. The same hands that threw the stone now strummed a song of praise. "You, Lord, make the weak strong. You lift up those who trust in you." His voice floated softly through the still night. Far behind him, Saul watched from his tent, the melody easing his troubled heart. David didn't wear a crown, but heaven already saw one shining above him. The crown of faith. The victory over Goliath spread across Israel like fire. Everywhere people sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." The sound echoed through every town and street. David didn't seek praise. His heart was still the same, thankful, humble, full of peace. But King Saul's heart began to change. Jealousy crept in like a shadow. When David played the harp, Saul smiled on the outside, but inside, his heart trembled with envy. "Why do they sing more for him than for me?" he thought. Yet David never noticed. He only played to please God. Days passed and Saul's unease grew stronger. One evening, as David played, Saul suddenly gripped his spear. Anger filled his heart. But before he could act, David's song changed. Gentle, sorrowful, filled with forgiveness. The music seemed to wash over Saul like a soft wave, cooling his anger. Slowly, the king's hand loosened, and the spear fell to the floor. David kept playing, eyes closed, whispering quietly, "The Lord is my refuge." In that moment, God's presence once again filled the room, pushing back the darkness. The next morning, Saul sent David on missions with his army. Every time, David led with courage and kindness. The people loved him more and more. He never bragged or boasted. He only served. "The Lord was with David," the soldiers whispered, "and everything he does succeeds." Saul watched from afar, his heart a storm of pride and fear. Yet God's plan moved quietly forward, shaping the shepherd into a leader. What Saul saw as a threat, God saw as a promise. That evening, the sound of celebration filled the streets. Women sang, tambourines rang, and children danced around David. Yet Saul's jealousy deepened. He called for his son Jonathan and spoke quietly. "Keep an eye on him. He may take my place." But Jonathan only smiled. He saw something pure in David's heart, a friendship forming by God's own hand. The two met secretly and made a promise to protect each other no matter what came. In a world filled with envy, God was planting a seed of loyalty and love. Later that night, David returned to his quiet room. The cheers, the songs, the victories, all faded away. Only the stars remained, and the whisper of God's presence. Lord, he prayed softly, help me keep my heart pure, even when others turn against me. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant music and war drums. David picked up his harp once more, playing a gentle tune that rose toward heaven. For even when storms were near, his heart stayed still in God's hands. The boy who once faced giants now faced something harder, learning to stay faithful when praised and humble when tested. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Saul's jealousy burned brighter, yet David stayed faithful. He served with kindness, even when the king's eyes grew dark. One night, Saul's anger returned and David fled into the hills. The stars above him flickered like tiny fires of hope. Though hunted, he felt no hate in his heart. Lord, he whispered, help me love even those who wish me harm. The hills of Bethlehem felt far away now. Yet David knew the same God who watched him among the sheep was still with him among the shadows. David hid in a cave near the wilderness of En-Gedi. One morning, footsteps echoed inside. Saul had entered the very cave where David was hiding. David's men whispered, now is your chance. End this. But David shook his head. I will not harm the one God has chosen. Slowly, he crept forward and cut a small piece from Saul's robe. Nothing more. Later, from a distance, David called out, my lord, the king! See, I mean you no harm. Saul froze, tears filling his eyes. You are more righteous than I, he cried. You have repaid evil with good. Years passed. Saul's heart grew tired and troubled. But David's love for God never faded. When the king finally fell in battle, David wept bitterly. My king, my master, he said through tears. How the mighty have fallen. He refused to rejoice in victory. Instead, he mourned the man who once tried to destroy him. True greatness, David learned, wasn't in defeating enemies, but in showing mercy. His heart, shaped by years of trust and forgiveness, was ready for what came next. The people of Israel gathered, calling for David to lead them. He walked slowly to the old town of Hebron, the same heart still humble, the same voice still singing to God. There, the elders anointed him with oil, saying, you shall be king over Israel. As the oil touched his head once again, David closed his eyes. He saw the shepherd boy he once was, standing in golden fields, singing to the sky. Nothing about his heart had changed. He was still the boy who trusted God with everything. That night, from the palace balcony, David looked out over the same stars that once guided him as a shepherd. The crown felt heavy, but his heart was light. You saw me when no one else did, Lord, he whispered. You chose me not for my strength, but for my heart. The wind stirred gently, carrying the sound of distant sheep bells from Bethlehem's hills. He smiled. A king, he said softly, is just a shepherd with a bigger flock to care for. And under the glow of heaven's light, the shepherd boy who became king lifted his song once more, a song for the God who sees the heart.